So for the last 20 years or more now, we've been doing our first talk in the year looking at the planetary patterns that's taking place throughout the coming months. And this year we'll be dividing this into 4 sessions between the 4 committee members. And so we're going to be starting with Gillian, who will be giving a brief review of the astrology of 2020. So over to you, Gillian.
Hello, everybody. So, yes, I'm going to be looking back at 2020. My goodness, what a year it's been. And I apologise that I'm not really going to sugarcoat this. There are a few better things I could say, but all in all, I think we'll agree that 2020 has not been the best of years. We've obviously had COVID-19 to put up with. I'm going to speak a bit more about the Black Lives Movement that's come up. We've had forest fires that started off the year in Australia and continued in the west coast of the US. All sorts of other things. So let's just have a little look at what really kicked it all off. And this was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that happened on the 12th of January. I've got the chart for this here. Saturn-Pluto conjunctions generally take place every 32 to 38 years, and they are associated, as Richard Tarnas says, with times of trauma, for having to face some hard realities, the uncovering of fetid messes that have accumulated over a period of time. They've happened at times when people have, there's been great conflict, has been in groups and out groups and a sense of threat and great fear. And I think that we can see all of that in what's been happening in this year. You'll notice here that actually Jupiter is on the south node at the moment that this conjunction happened. And the last time that the conjunction happened in Capricorn, early on, it was 1518 in the early degrees of Capricorn, and then the later degrees, it wasn't until way back in 1284, but don't have time to go back as far as that. Not only have we had the Saturn conjunct Pluto this year, 22 Cap, we've also had 3 conjunctions of Jupiter with Pluto in April, the end of June, and mid-November. Jupiter, of course, came to conjunct Saturn on the 21st of December, having moved, the two having moved out of Capricorn into Aquarius. But during the last 6 months of the year, Mars in Aries has been squaring that stellium in Capricorn. And Mars has also on occasions been conjunct Eris, and throughout the year, Eris has been squaring Pluto, or Pluto has been squaring Eris. So those are some of the things that we've been working with. And in a short period of time like this, I'm just going to hit the highlights because, my goodness, there are plenty of highlights. Of course, we've also got Neptune in the in rulership in Pisces, throwing a fog of illusion and disillusionment. It's been a year when we haven't known what to believe in or whom to believe. There have been a number of competing narratives and a great deal of confusion. And of course, Neptune is also associated with the spread of infectious disease. And Uranus in Taurus, well, people have been predicting financial insecurity and instability with Uranus in Taurus, and my goodness, this has been the year for it. It's not over yet, I suspect, as Uranus continues in Taurus next year, but COVID has obviously had a huge effect on our lives. And there's also been plenty of earthquakes and volcanoes, which I'm not going to go into detail with because, as I say, I'm short of time. So one of the things that Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter in Capricorn can be seen to uncover is issues that have been long-standing issues of corruption or injustice, or top-down authority weighing on people and people sort of struggling up against it. And I think that this is profoundly shown by the Black Lives Matter movement, which didn't come out of nowhere. It actually goes back to, well, it goes back to the civil rights movement, but Black Lives Matter was first put on as a Facebook post in 2013 after a case when a young man, Trayvon Martin, was shot dead by police. He was just going to get some iced tea and something to eat from a local shop. He was unarmed, and there's been a whole series, as you can see, I won't read them all out, but a whole series of appalling police brutality. And then this year, March the 13th, police shot Breonna Taylor, and on May the 25th, George Floyd died, and really that was when things erupted in terms of non-violent, mostly non-violent. Black Lives Matter tries to be a non-violent organisation, protests about the need for reform in the police. So that's one of the areas. The other area that I'm going to point to for this particular talk is what happened really quite close to when, I mean, I mentioned that Mars has been in Aries for the last 6 months. On the first slide, I forgot to mention that apart from the usual retrogrades that we get with the outer planets, we've also had a Mars retrograde this year, which has lasted to the extent that it has spent the last 6 months pretty much in its home sign of Aries, and has only just yesterday moved into Taurus. We also had a Venus transit, a Venus retrograde, and of course we've had 3 Mercury retrogrades. But I want to focus on the fact that the Mars retrograde has meant that there have been 3 waxing squares between Mars and the outer planet stellium in Capricorn, because Mars has been in Aries. And this particular awful thing took place pretty close to a Mars square. I'll show you the chart. Well, actually, I'll show you the chart and then I'll go back to the information. So here's the chart. You can see here that Mars in Aries, late Aries, is squaring Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn in Capricorn. Opposite Venus, at the same time as the Sun is making a square to Uranus in Taurus. And I cast the chart for as accurate a time as I could get for the explosion. There was an initial fire followed by an enormous explosion, and I cast it for Beirut. And as you can see, the ascendant on that moment, Jupiter was virtually on the ascendant for Beirut at that particular point. So quite an interesting chart. But again, this is something that goes back a long way, a long time. Way back in November 2013, there was a consignment of ammonium nitrate that was being shipped to Mozambique. It made an unscheduled stop at Beirut. The ship owner asked for the ship to take on some heavy machinery. And the captain of the ship said that this was due to pure greed later on, Pluto. And it tried to get some heavy machinery on board, really heavy plant. In doing so, the hold doors buckled, and the ship was taking on water. It was declared unsafe by the Beirut port authorities, refused permission to leave port. The crew were on board, some of the crew were on board for about a year before they were allowed to go home. The owners abandoned all sort of responsibility for it. as did the people who owned the cargo. And in the end, about a year afterwards, it was put into a warehouse where it was kept with a number of other perilous products, including fireworks. Despite letters from the Port Authority to the judiciary requesting the removal, nothing happened for years and years and years. And then in 2020, there was some welding going on to repair a hole somewhere nearby. And there was a fire. Then there were some small explosions, possibly the fireworks, and then an absolutely enormous, appalling explosion that actually measured nearly 3.5 on the Richter scale, with great loss of life. And I think that this says something about Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, the huge expansion of this, but Pluto and Saturn exposing corruption in high places. And immediately they moved to arrest the port, the people in charge in the port, but it is spreading to include some other people as well, some very rich people. Okay, so overall, what a year. The COVID-19 spikes in deaths and infections have tended to coincide with the Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions. I've mentioned the forest fires. I think we've seen a lack of integrity and competence in our leaders, but perhaps shouldn't go too much on that. And I was looking for some positives. Obviously, there was a mass grounding of flights because of the stopping of air travel, and that's still very restricted. And thank goodness that did see carbon dioxide emissions reducing by up to 60% during that particular period of time. We also saw goats on the streets of Llandudno and various other wild animals coming in to take the spaces that had been vacated by us human beings. But there were the forest fires, there's been plagues of locusts, and Amazon deforestation is reaching a 12-year high under Bolsonaro's leadership in Brazil. And there are mountains and mountains of plastic waste as a result of PPE. Anyone who wants to explore scandal in high places might like to look a little bit further at the Good Law Project, which has been looking at some of the things to do with PPE and how it's being procured. But I think that's probably enough about that. Thankfully, we have some changes. Jupiter left Capricorn on the 16th of December, followed shortly afterwards by Saturn left on 16th, shortly followed after by Jupiter. So they made their once every 20 years, but also once every 200-year conjunction in Aquarius, as well as the regular 20-year conjunction. It's also the start of a new 200-year cycle in air, the first in air. Well, there was the sort of 1980 sort of initial peak with the conjunction in Libra, but now we're firmly into these conjunctions happening in air signs. And let's hope that some things may change for the better. But we still will have Pluto continuing Capricorn. He's been there since 2008 and will be there until 2024. And Neptune continues in Pisces and Uranus continues in Taurus until 2025. So I suspect that it's not over yet. Okay, I think that pretty much covers what I'm going to say. And let's move on to 2021.
Thank you very much, Gillian. That's a really good overview of last year and the extraordinary astrological events. So I'm going to now look at what's happening this year. I'm going to walk through the astrological events in sequence this year. So I'm just going to share my screen. So we're going to look at the main planetary events of this year. So where we always start, and Gillian has included this in her presentation, is with the outer planet context, by which I mean the sign positions of the 3 outer planets, because as Gillian said, they're obviously very important and they're in the background all the time, forming a backdrop to the changing planetary patterns. So we've, as Gillian said, we've had Pluto in Capricorn since 2008, and it peeps into Aquarius in 2023, but goes fully into Aquarius in 2024. And Pluto in Capricorn, within a month of Pluto going to Capricorn, we had the banking crash, which had massive repercussions on many or most of the world's economies, and which we're by no means fully recovered from. And I don't know about you, but Pluto in Capricorn has felt like a real tough slog through that sign. And Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012. It dipped into it in 2011, and it will leave fully in 2026. It dips into Aries in 2025 briefly. So as Gillian said, there's been illusion and disillusion. There's been the rise of fake news. And as Chris has pointed out in meetings in the real world in Cheltenham at our previous talks, Neptune events under Neptune in Pisces tend to, if not spiral out of control, then at least go beyond any boundaries that people might have expected those events to have been contained by. So that's perhaps a nature of Neptune in the sign. And also we have Uranus in Taurus, which dipped in 2018, went into Taurus properly in 2019, and leaves it in 2026. So as Gillian mentioned, we've got well, now an extraordinary financial calamity, sudden kind of reversals of fortune, difficulties for individuals and countries, economically speaking. And also Uranus in Taurus might bring changes in the way we produce food, might bring ecological changes, some sudden unexpected changes, and also practical inventiveness, practical innovations. But we'll see as it unfolds in the coming years. Now it's just worthwhile noting that all 3 outer signs, outer planets at the moment, are in yin signs, earth and water, 2 earth signs, 1 water sign. And at the end of April 2026, when I think Uranus moves into Taurus finally, all 3 of those outer planets would have switched to have been in yang signs. So 2026 is going to, and onwards, is going to feel, I would imagine, I would suggest, it's going to feel very different. Fire and air, very different energy to earth and water, much more outgoing, bright, fast moving. So anyway, we'll all notice that shift. Okay, so there's just a table which shows you the dates at which the outer planets moved into the current signs and which they move out or egress out of those signs. And by the way, we're recording this, as Chris said, and we're as with nearly all our webinars, we've put them onto our YouTube channel, and we will send a one-off email to everybody who's here this evening just to let you know when that has been edited and put up onto our channel, which will probably be in a few days' time. So you'll be able to see this table there again, or you could take a snapshot of it now if you wish. Okay, so moving on. I'm just going to look at the range of motion of the planets throughout the year. So starting with Pluto, you can see Pluto moves only a couple of degrees during most years. So it's moving from, I think, 22 to 24 degrees Capricorn, this year, maybe 23 to 25, I can't quite remember now, but just a couple of degrees. Saturn moves almost halfway through Aquarius this year. Jupiter is speeding through Aquarius, and it actually reaches just over 2 degrees Pisces in May this year, and then it moves back into Aquarius, and then at the end of the year it just reaches Pisces. And then we move on to Ceres, which we don't always look at in astrology, but Ceres was regarded as a planet when it was first discovered, and some would say that it should be brought back into our pantheon of planets. And Ceres moves, takes 4.5 years to go around the zodiac, to go around the sun. So it does just over 3, on average, it travels just over 3 signs during the year. So it moves from mid-Pisces to mid-Gemini this year. And I've included Ceres because it was actually part of this Saturn-Pluto conjunction last year. That's not the only reason I'm including it, but just to point out that it was part of this conjunction. All 3 of these planets, Saturn, Pluto and Ceres, were at 22 degrees of Capricorn last January. So Ceres was very much part of that conjunction. And if you take Ceres as being strongly connected with nature, then perhaps that said something about you know, how nature has had a hand, or our abuse and exploitation of nature and animals has been part of the crisis and predicament that we're now in with the spread of COVID, through the transmission of coronavirus from one species to another. So then moving on to Neptune, you can see that Neptune is in late Pisces and it moves about 5 degrees during the year. Then we have Chiron in Aries, which moves about 8 degrees through early Aries. Then Uranus, as we've said, is in Taurus and it moves around 10 degrees during the year. And then finally, we've got the moon's nodes, the north node here and the south node up here. And the glyph I've put at the end of the orange bar because the nodes move backwards through the zodiac. So it takes about 18 years for the nodes to go around the zodiac. So you can see that it's moved about 2/3 of through Gemini back to almost the beginning of Gemini. So that's the range of motion of the major planets throughout the year and the moon's nodes. So now I'm going to move on to the outer planet aspects and the eclipses, starting with January. So on January the 17th, which as we noted during discussion at the beginning, before we started the presentations, is rather close to the American presidential inauguration, which I think is on the 20th. And this is actually within orb at the moment, which I'll show you in a moment. So we've got Jupiter in Aquarius at the moment squaring Uranus in Taurus, and they're both in fixed signs. And the square aspect is an aspect of conflict, of difference, but can be very creative. Something new can be born of that potentially creative conflict, but sometimes it's just conflict. But also worth noting, sorry, ignore this, that shouldn't be there. Worth noting is that Jupiter-Uranus square on the 17th is also joined by Mars. And Uranus will also have gone stationary direct, I think a couple of days before this square. So it's quite a potent aspect. And I tend to, personally, I tend to look at the coming year and look at what aspects there are between outer planets and particularly squares, conjunctions and oppositions, and I tend to, and trines. and I tend to see them as kind of signatures of the year ahead. You know, they say something about what that year is going to be like. So the year begins on quite a volatile note, with Jupiter square Uranus and Mars coming up to it in a couple of weeks. So here's a diagram just showing this is giving Jupiter and Uranus a 5 degrees orb, which is quite generous from my point of view. But so it's been, Jupiter's been within orb of squaring Uranus, if you give it a 5 degree orb, since December the 27th, and it will remain so until the second week of February. But the peak is on January the 17th. Okay, so just a few words about this this square that come to mind, and please feel free to disagree or come up with your own and bring them to the chat box or to the discussion afterwards. So as I mentioned, they're both in fixed signs, so there's something fixed about this particular square. There's a strong desire for freedom. I'd say both planets have a connection with freedom. There's zealotry with Jupiter Uranus. There's a kind of holding to a vision and a determination to make that vision real. There's a desire to break free from limitations. There's potential for brilliant ideas, for genius even, for innovations with Jupiter Uranus. A desire for revolution, to overthrow things. Rebellion against constraints and against authority. And there's the idea of ideals versus rash action. So the idealism of Jupiter versus or in conflict with the kind of rashness and the suddenness and the sometimes unthinkingness of Uranus. And there's unrest as well, you might expect, and a lot of excitement. And you know, as with Jupiter, Jupiter overdoes things, so it's going to be overexcitement. Things are going to get overhyped, or have that potential at least. So there's just some ideas, and I'm sure you've come up with your own already, or perhaps will be inspired to come up with your own as we go through this. So then moving on to February, between the 10th and the 12th of February, we've got this amazing focus on the sign of Aquarius. So joining Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, we've got Sun, Mercury and Venus. And they're joined for a few days by the moon. And on the 11th, we get the new moon in Aquarius as well. So that's an extraordinary focus on the Aquarian energy of idealism, of thought, of intellectuality, of social reform, of humanitarian ideas and ideals, and progressive ideas. So that's an interesting but short-lived period. But of course, Jupiter and Saturn remain in Aquarius throughout the year. So and they have together, as they conjuncted, they are, as Gillian said, they've heralded what you could call a mini age of Aquarius for the next 20 years. So moving on to February the 17th, we have the first of 3 Saturn-Uranus squares. This one is at 7 degrees and 13 minutes of Aquarius and Taurus. And so this is a strong signature for the year. So I think it's worth thinking a little about what Saturn square Uranus might mean. And by the way, giving the 2 planets a 5 degree orb again, you can see that actually they are within aspect 2/3 of this year and on into the first part of 2022. So they, you know, if you take a 5 degree orb, they never actually leave the square, except in the early autumn period. So again, we've got fixed energies, Aquarius and Taurus. So people, ideas, situations that are kind of stuck or resolute or perhaps not changing or don't want to change when they perhaps are trying to change each other somehow. You've got the ideas versus practicalities. So Saturn in Aquarius can be sometimes a bit sort of ivory tower, whereas Uranus in Taurus has the connotation of being down on the ground, finding innovative solutions to practical problems. You've got ingenuity of Uranus versus the skepticism of Saturn in Aquarius, a limitation of freedom, Saturn trying to contain Uranus, intellect versus rash action, the old order versus the new order. So you might see that, you know, this year is about a struggle between an old order that is dying and a new order that's being given birth to. And stress as well. Saturn Uranus aspects, you know, in one's personal chart can be somewhat stressful. We kind of feel that tension between you know, the fixity of Saturn or the solidity of Saturn and the energy and desire for change of Uranus, and conflict between old ideas and new solutions, and a stubborn resistance to change as well. So, you know, these are just some ideas for how this aspect might manifest throughout the year. So moving on to April the 29th, we have Ceres squaring Pluto. And I mentioned that I'd include Ceres in this look at the planets because it was conjunct that Saturn-Pluto conjunction at last January. So here it is at the end of April squaring Pluto. And it makes, you know, because it's so fast moving, it does make a lot of aspects to outer planets. So it's not a massive big deal, but, you know, there may be some connection with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, or there may be some event to do with climate or nature, or even with farming somehow. And that's at 26 degrees 48 of Aries and Capricorn. And then in May the 13th, Jupiter enters Pisces, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's whizzing through Aquarius. And then on May the 26th, we have the first eclipse of the year, a total lunar eclipse, visible in Australasia, the west coast of the USA, and East Asia. And this is at 5 degrees 26 minutes of Gemini. And that's quickly followed by a solar eclipse. And this one is an annular one, which means that the moon won't appear to fully cover the disk of the sun. And that will be the totality will be visible in Canada, Greenland, North Russia, and it'll be partially visible in the United Kingdom in these for a couple of hours in the morning. And that's at 19 degrees 47 Gemini. And a few days later, we've got another second Saturn-Uranus square. This time it's joined by Ceres. So Ceres is part of this particular pattern at 13 degrees and 7 minutes of Aquarius and Taurus. And then, actually this is in the wrong order. No, it isn't, sorry. Moving on to July the 13th. Now these aren't outer planets, but we've included this because potentially and hopefully this will be a great day to have a party. So this is July the 13th, Venus conjunct Mars in Leo. A great day to go to the theatre, go to a band, throw a party, and let's hope that by the summer we're in that position to be able to do that. So that's at 19 degrees and 49 minutes of Leo. Again in July, on the 28th, Jupiter goes back into Aquarius. And then moving on to November, we have another lunar eclipse. This time it's a partial lunar eclipse, so the moon doesn't get fully obscured by the shadow of the Earth, and that will be visible in North and South America, Western Europe and Asia, and in the United Kingdom we'll be able to see it at sunrise, although it could be a bit chilly in late November. And then on December the 4th, we've got a total solar eclipse at 12 degrees 22 Sagittarius, and you'd have to be in Antarctica to see this one. So if you're an eclipse chaser, then you're going to have an interesting journey on a boat to the Antarctica. And then on December the 24th, Christmas Eve, we've got the final third Saturn-Uranus square, and this time it's at 11 degrees and 6 minutes of Aquarius and Taurus. And then finally, on December the 29th, Jupiter enters Pisces fully and goes off on its journey through Pisces for the following year. Okay, so that's a kind of quick romp through the main planetary events. I hope that's given you a kind of sense of what's happening astrologically throughout this year. And I shall now hand you over to Pamela, who's going to be looking at some interesting charts. So over to you, Pamela.
Thanks so much. That was a wonderful tour of what we can look forward to or prepare ourselves for. I'm going to be talking about Britain and England, and a little bit about the EU, and then also about just touching on America. So really, what I'm going to be looking at is, politics. So when we were thinking about this presentation, we just really realized that we couldn't contain it all within 1 year. And, on the one hand, we're starting, with the year on January the 1st, ending it on the end of December. But as astrologers, we know that the cycles come in and go out, dancing to a different drum. So this little section is going to stretch a little bit beyond 2021, and we can just prepare ourselves and think about more things that are going to be happening for us and get ready for them. I'm going to be talking about what I call England, given Brexit and what our country has decided to do. And I found myself drawn to setting up the chart for a very, very early part of English history. I didn't want to go to the 1801 chart because somehow it just didn't seem to resonate for me. So I decided that I'd look at the 1707 English chart, which is when what we think of as Great Britain came together, because all the parts of Scotland and England and Wales appeared to coalesce and become an entity. But first, let's look at Brexit. And the chart that I've chosen for this, all these charts I have felt have been slightly idiosyncratic, because I've chosen the moment the Queen signed the document the Parliament presented her with. So this isn't the moment that when the EU said farewell to us and we said farewell to the EU at 11 o'clock on the day. This is when Boris Johnson's government chose to present a document to the Queen. So this is Boris Johnson of what I would call England. This is his document and this is his chart. Scotland doesn't want to leave the EU and Northern Ireland don't want to leave the EU. So I'm presenting to you what I think may become the chart of England when Scotland tries to leave, when Northern Ireland tries to leave the United Kingdom. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But it's arguable that this could be the new chart of England. I'm just going to put that out there as a thought. The main emphasis in this chart is the Moon Pluto across the 10th, 4th axis. And we know that that's about obsessive feelings and matters of life and death. And as anyone who's lived in the United Kingdom for the last 4 years, or are British and have lived around the world and have been involved in these discussions that have gone on, we all know that somehow the import of what we've been talking about has got more to do with pounds, shillings and pence, and it has somehow got to the very, very core of our sense of identity and who we are, to a point at which I don't think actually our language even necessarily encapsulates it well enough. So this for me very much captures the spirit of the times. Which is this Moon-Pluto opposition of deeply held, almost inarticulate feelings of matters of life, matters of death. I've extracted from this chart, which I'm calling the English chart, a couple of patterns which I think are important and which we could look at in perhaps a bit greater detail. And they are the fact that we have the ruling planet Venus conjunct the south node. We have Neptune at the bends of the nodal axis. We have Venus square Neptune, and we have Neptune, which can lead to a hazy grasp of the mundane. So the ruling planet Venus conjunct the south node. Really, you know, the sense that I have of that is that this is the harking back to better times that many people felt that drove the vote that they made, that we could be better like we used to be. And so here's Venus on the south node, which is the root of our past, and that's our values, and that's what our country has done. It thinks, you know, it can recreate this thing that happened somehow in our history that will make us a better nation. Neptune at the bends indicates a degree of, well, I was interested in Gillian's use of the phrase, Neptune, let us think, is a sense of confusion, a sense of longing, a sense of keening, that keening yearning of our soul to go to a better place. And it's at the bends of the destiny of this chart. And so I would say that we're really not quite sure of where it is that we've come from and where it is that we're going. So there's a degree of indeterminacy about this chart. Neptune in the sixth might give a hazy grasp of the mundane, which of course is something we're going to have to get over because we will be negotiating with the EU for about the next 10 years about the detail of all the trade agreements we're going to have to start making, because of course Brexit was just a moment and now the negotiations begin. So I'm going to look at what I'm calling the kingdom chart now, which is the 1707 chart. I've chosen not, as I say, to look at the traditional chart that we think of, the 1801 chart, because I'm going back to a time when all these parts of this island tried to draw itself together. So, and it'll be quite interesting for us to look at, you know, when we drew together, why we're now trying to separate out. So the kingdom chart of 1707 is like this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time at this chart because it's too complicated. I'm not going to go into it in very great detail, except to say that there is a first house emphasis of the Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter that curiously was going on in 1707. And we've had Gillian talk to us about Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter earlier in our talk. And so we do know what that's about. And here it is in the first house. So in 1707, our nation, our group of inchoate regions were pulling themselves together and changing the way they were being seen and changing the way they were presenting themselves to the world in terms of their first house. This is the Kingdom 1707 chart and the Queen's signature on Johnson's Brexit trade deal, which is what I'm calling the English chart. And this is what I've drawn out that I think are important aspects between the two things. And what strikes me about this is the Martian feature, Mars in the seventh of the Kingdom chart, which makes it dynamic. The Kingdom chart will dynamically relate on a one-to-one basis, is conjunct Boris Johnson's Brexit chart, conjunct the moon. And so this is fascinating because we have the people now, us, we, our nation, the population, making a partile conjunction with a Martian energy from deep history. And I'm not actually going to extrapolate very much from that. I think let's just think about that. You know, we've got, as I say, we've got 10 years of negotiations minimum with the EU. Let's see, you know, how that unfolds. We've got Mars on Johnson's Brexit chart, conjunct the North Node of the Kingdom chart. And so this is a very, very determined statement about wresting our destiny and motivating ourselves to change it the way we, in a Martian fashion, we want it to be for us. The thing that I find most curious about this chart is the Sun conjunct Chiron. So in the Kingdom chart, we have Chiron on the 12th. What a curious place. And of course, Chiron hadn't been discovered in 1707, but how interesting that the wounded part of our nation, that wound that will never, does never, can never heal, which is the Chironic journey, is in the 12th. So it's inaccessible and it's in the dream world and it's lost. And it's hard to heal, hard to get better. And here we have Johnson's Brexit chart with the Sun right on it. And so it's, you know, maybe entirely appropriate. You know, here we talk about the fact that Brexiters apparently wanted to go back to an empire, you know, the times of empire and the times of the Industrial Revolution when we were a great nation. I would argue that this chart shows us that actually Brexiters were looking further back. And they were looking right back to 1707. Because this chart with this Sun, this modern chart with this Sun, is trying to do something to that original wound. Moving on to our relationship with the EU, the only thing I want to say about this chart is the Treaty of Rome chart. Again, I kept taking charts right back to the original. I just wanted to go right back to the first building block. So there are other charts for the EU. This is the one that I wanted. And the only thing I'd say about this chart, because there's too much detail to take in, is simply look at the ascendant and look how very similar it is to the Boris Johnson Brexit chart, which again is in Libra, not, you know, which is not uncommon if you're making treaties. You know, Libra's going to figure. You're going to need to get your Venus out. You're going to need to connect to other people in a way that will allow you to get what you want. So in this chart, we have the Queen's signature on Johnson's Brexit deal chart in the center, and we have the Treaty of Rome around the outside, and we have the EU Sun conjunct the UK Brexit Chiron in the 6th. Curious, isn't it? It's a spooky and eerie repetition of the 1707 one. We have the EU moon conjunct the UK Brexit Jupiter Saturn in the 4th. Now, maybe this bodes well because the moon is about sustenance, it's about resource, it's about how you maintain and sustain your physical environment in a way that will keep you alive and in a very instinctive way. And that's the EU's resources connecting to our sense of our Jupiter Saturn, which would be to do with the way we're wanting to make our laws and the way we want our belief system to be reflected in our laws, our new laws, this new way we have of relating to the world. And the EU's moon is connected right to it. Maybe there'll be a synergy. I would just point out, though, that the EU's Saturn is in the third, so they're going to have some hard words, some constrained documentation, and they're going to be disciplined about the way they communicate, and it will be in a reduced and restricted fashion, which may not bode well for negotiations. And the EU Mars is on the cusp, so I would imagine that that they're going to be very touchy with us, and given that we are now a foreigner to them, we could activate that Mars of theirs very quickly, very easily, and if they're not already very angry with us, they could soon be. So turning now to the United States, we're all extremely aware, I'm sure, of what happened yesterday. So I'm just going to, again, I'm just going to look at just a very few things. The main thing we're talking about with the United States, obviously we all know it's the Pluto return. And that's really what I wanted to talk about mainly. They're coming up to the Pluto return, and this is what I meant about we're traveling a little further than 2021 at the moment, because it's quite important, I think, for us astrologers not to wish our lives away and, you know, think, oh, that great transit, you know, that lovely Jupiter-Venus transit is coming up in 6 months' time. I'll just get through the next 6 months, you know, and then I'll have a party, you know, or what, you know, whatever. And I think we all do it, actually, but actually we'll wish our lives away. Our lives are finite, and the astrological cycles are infinite, and the two will, in a sense, never meet. And the point is that the Pluto return for the United States has been going on for 10 years. I mean, I can remember listening to Liz Green give a talk about Neptune, and I can remember her saying someone was trying to understand their Neptune transit, and she said, you really, really only understand a Neptune transit about 10 years after it's happened. You know, transits can be really long, and this Pluto return has been going on for 10 years, and it's really got a way to go yet. Even when it's exact, it's not till 2024. And then it's going to be remaining exact after that for somewhat, not exact, but it's going to be very close. So this is what the United States is going through, and what we think of as the upheaval of yesterday. This is something that has been building and is going to change and morph. And it's got between now and February 2024 to get a whole lot better and a whole lot worse. This is the inauguration chart. And I mean, you know, you have to bow to the cosmic joke of our great art and science of astrology. Pluto is conjunct the MC. It's not going anywhere. It is making itself seen, felt, recognized, loud and rude. The moon in the inauguration chart is at 29 Aries, and that's where the riot Mars was last night. So the riots that we saw across yesterday and all the unrest that's been going on in the immediate vicinity of our clock right now happened while Mars was where the inauguration moon is going to be. That's the people in America for the next 4 years. And Mars on the inauguration day will be conjunct Uranus. It's taking all that time, and Gillian gave a lovely exegesis about the Martian journey that we're going on. On the 20th of January, it conjuncts Uranus. So those are the immediate aspects that I wanted to talk about. All of us are doing the best we can. All of us want the best for our countries. We are all united in that aim. And we can all see, as astrologers, in this privileged position of foreknowledge, the work that there is to do. And I know that we will reach out, support, and share with each other across these months. Thank you very much. And Chris, I'm now finishing. And I'm coming over to you.
Okay, thank you, Pamela, for that. Those thought-provoking charts, and I'll remind people again that we will be able to revisit these charts and have a closer look at them on our, when it's uploaded to our YouTube channel in a few days. So I'm just going to put in the chat box a PDF which summarizes the aspects and planetary movements we've been talking about. So it's a file called Astrological Events 2021, and that gives you the dates and the degree positions of these various events, and you can download that from the chat box. So yes, and really following on from those positive words that Pamela ended with, I'm going to be taking a quick look at how we might use some of these energies in our personal lives. So I'm just going to share something. So yes, Graham started by mentioning the Jupiter Uranus squares. That's the full chart for that. I'm not going to have an in-depth look at that, but in terms of our own astrology, if you've got planets around about 5, 6, 7 degrees anywhere, then that square will be impacting on you. Of course, particularly if you've got planets in Taurus and Aquarius round about those degrees, that square will be very activated. So yes, we've mentioned that capacity for impulsiveness and sudden change, maybe precipitous action with Mars being there. And I think we all need to be aware of that. It can be looking at things, experiencing things in new ways. But one does have to be careful, I think, in acting out those energies too much, particularly when we got Mars involved there. But I guess if there are stresses in your life and that aspect is particularly aspecting your chart, then this may be a time when you're going to feel those stresses even more. And there can be some sort of breakage going on. And it's always difficult to, at the time particularly, to maybe understand, is that a positive change? Is it actually helping a change to happen that really does need to happen? Or am I doing things a bit precipitously here? In a few weeks' time, maybe things will have settled down again. So just be particularly aware of those degree positions. So the main aspect we have mentioned for the year, of course, is the Saturn-Uranus square. So I'm just going to share something different here. So Graham pointed out that this aspect is, let's put in the right chart up, does go on for most of the year. And so this is an animation of how this tracks through the year. So you can see it in terms of orb, it's probably coming into aspect now. But if we run it forward through the year, it's just coming up to its first square now in February. So again, you've got to be thinking of, do I have planets around about these degrees in my birth chart? In which case they're going to be aspecting. It makes that square again in the summer, and then Saturn starts backtracking. And well, it's got out of aspect now, depending on your orb, but arguably it's still an ongoing thing that's happening all year. So if it's affecting you, then there is this idea that maybe the 3 points of exactness are key points in an ongoing process that might last quite some time. So it's into the beginning of next year before Saturn is beginning to pull away from Uranus, but still in aspect. If we in a birth chart, we'd be saying that's pretty much in aspect. So Graham already mentioned some ideas about the nature of this aspect, so I'll put up a few more. Oops, sorry, wrong one. So Saturn and Uranus, yeah, they're quite opposite, as we mentioned. And so you've got to think in your own life, if this is, well, it's affecting us all. So we're all aware of this energy going on as astrologers this year. So balancing these two principles is incumbent on all of us, and we have a bit of advantage because we know the astrology. But of course, if it's particularly aspecting planets in your chart, then it's more likely to impact you directly. So we have to think about how we can acknowledge both of these. And because it's a square aspect, what I find with squares, I suggest, is that if you activate one end of a square, the other end will be activated as well. You can't do one without the other. So if Uranus is transiting your Venus and you're feeling suddenly uncomfortable in a relationship, a close relationship of some sort, and you want to break it in some way or move on for it or change it radically, then you're going to come up against the Saturn practicalities of that. Similarly, if Saturn was transiting your Mars, say, and you're feeling very restricted or very organized, or you want to start some very long-term project, Uranus is going to be there shaking that up and maybe saying, no, you can't do that. So it's challenging, this stuff. So let's just remember how we can try and acknowledge both of those. You can't, this year, we can't have Saturn without Uranus or Uranus without Saturn. And if ever we're starting to get too Saturnian, Uranus is likely to start shouting. And if ever we start getting Uranus to be too prominent, then Saturn will start pointing out the consequences on a mundane level to us. So yes, how can one be predictable and unstable at the same time? Yeah, how can one be stable and inventive and irresponsible? How do you mix electricity with coldness and moistness? So that's the challenge for us this year. And I'll just point out at the bottom there, again, a reminder of the points of exactness, which are 17th of Feb, 7 degrees, 14th of June, 13 degrees, and 24th of December at 11 degrees. But remember, this is a process going on all year. So I wanted to end on something which is a bit more positive, which Graham has already touched on. And this is the conjunction of Mars and Venus. So again, I've got a little animation because there's something quite curious here. So, you know, Mars and Venus move pretty quickly, and we get a conjunction of about every 2 years on average, although the gaps between them varies quite a lot. So they're not major aspects, but as Graham pointed out, that period of that conjunction in the summer might be a very potentially enjoyable time for us. So this is the way Mars and Venus are going to be moving this year. You can see that they're just coming up to a trine at the moment, actually. Venus is just about to move into Capricorn, so we'll have a few days of it trining Mars, which I guess may help things calm down. So as we go through the years, obviously they move much more quickly than the outer planets. Quick square there. Quick sextile. Venus is catching up with Mars quite rapidly now. I'll just try and stop that moment when we get to. So round about there, that's when the conjunction is. They're probably together close enough to be in orb for about 2 weeks, so about a week either side of that. And it's in Leo, so as Graham has suggested, good time for a party maybe, good time for creative projects. And yeah, again, if you've got some planets around about those degrees of Leo, then that's really good for you. Should be really positive, nice opportunities there. But any planets around about that degree will, of course, be being aspected by that conjunction. Just looking a bit further ahead, I just wanted to run this forward and just point out something that's going to happen with this. We'd expect this not to come round for another couple of years, maybe, you see, but we'll run it forward. Venus then goes off being much quicker than Mars, gets quite a long way ahead. Mars is losing a bit of touch there, but oh, so Venus is starting to slow down now. They're getting quite, oh, they're coming back together again. So they get conjunct. This is in next year, conjunct. So that's something quite curious, that we can see that when we get to the end of, well, into January next year, they're conjunct, and they're actually going to be conjunct for about 2 months, which is quite unusual. It's unusual they're going to be conjunct so quickly, but they stay together through Capricorn and Aquarius for 2 months. So maybe that's something to look forward to, and possibly as well, if you are thinking of tuning into the conjunction of Mars and Venus this year, maybe stuff one might start then could really come to fruition in the beginning of next year. So there's just a reminder of some of the energies of Mars and Venus. I think we're probably fairly aware of this. And again, they're quite potentially different energies. And when you're talking about those together, again, it's thinking about how you can blend those. But with Saturn and Uranus, we were talking about it being a square. So it's like that, or it's trying to pull apart. This is they're nice stuck together. That Mars and Venus are holding hands for a moment, or embracing. So do be aware of that time round about the 2nd to the 21st of July. We'll see what happens then. So that's the end of my little presentation. So I think now we will throw open to the room, and we'll unmute everybody. And if you'd like to make any contributions or comments, or maybe you've got some of those transits hitting your chart, then do please feel free to share those with us.